The crowd at the Founders' Day celebration parted like the Red Sea as Florence O'Malley stormed through, her blue eyes flashing with a fire that most of Wood River, Nebraska, had learned to fear. It was 1876, and while the nation celebrated its centennial, this small frontier town was about to witness yet another showdown between its most outspoken daughter and the town elders. "You cannot be serious, Mayor Holloway." Florence's voice carried across the town square, causing several ladies to clutch their pearls and gentlemen to clear their throats uncomfortably. "The school needs those funds far more than we need another statue of your father." Mayor Bartholomew Holloway, a portly man with mutton chops that seemed to consume half his face, puffed up like an indignant rooster. "Miss O'Malley, this is hardly the time or place. When is the time, sir? Behind closed doors where you and your cronies can dismiss the needs of our children without public scrutiny." Florence stood her ground, her cream-colored dress billowing slightly in the spring breeze. At 24, she was no longer the impetuous girl who had once released all the pigs from Old Man Henderson's pen to protest his mistreatment of the animals. But the fire that burned within her had only grown stronger with age. "That is quite enough, Mrs. Abernathy," the self-appointed moral guardian of Wood River, stepped forward. "Young lady, your father would be mortified by this display. A proper woman knows when to hold her tongue." Florence felt the familiar sting of those words. Her father had been gone 3 years now, taken by the influenza that had swept through town, leaving her alone with nothing but his small bookshop and a reputation as the most troublesome woman in 3 counties. "My father taught me to speak truth to power, Mrs. Abernathy. Something this town seems to have forgotten how to do." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Florence could feel the judgment in their stares, the silent condemnation that had followed her since childhood. Wood River had long ago decided that Florence O'Malley was too bold, too outspoken, too everything for a proper lady. "Perhaps, Miss O'Malley," Mayor Holloway said with a patronizing smile, "you might consider that the school committee position you've applied for requires a certain temperance of character, one that you have just demonstrated you sorely lack." Florence felt the blood drain from her face. She had been angling for that position for months, seeing it as her chance to make real change in the education of Wood River's children, particularly the girls who were often shortchanged in their learning. "You're rejecting my application because I dare to question your decisions?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly despite her best efforts. "I'm rejecting it because you lack the decorum necessary for such an important position." The mayor adjusted his vest with an air of finality. "The committee has already chosen Mrs. Abernathy to fill the vacancy." Mrs. Abernathy, who had once suggested that teaching girls mathematics beyond basic arithmetic would overtax their delicate constitutions, smiled smugly. Florence felt the familiar burn of humiliation and rage mixing in her chest. "This town will never progress if you continue to silence those who challenge you," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the square. "Miss O'Malley." Sheriff Wilson stepped forward, his weathered face stern beneath his gray mustache. "That's enough disruption for one day. Why don't you head on home now?" It wasn't a request. Florence knew when she was beaten, at least for the moment. With as much dignity as she could muster, she turned and walked away from the celebration, ignoring the whispers that followed her like shadows. "That girl needs a husband to settle her down, too wild by half." Just like her mother, God rest her soul, Florence quickened her pace, desperate to escape the weight of their judgment. Her mother had been just like her, passionate, outspoken, unwilling to bend to convention. The town had never forgiven Eleanor O'Malley for organizing the women to march on the saloons during that dry summer when too many men had drunk away their family's food money. She had died when Florence was just 12, but her spirit lived on in her daughter. Florence made her way to O'Malley Books, the small shop that had been her family's livelihood for 2 generations. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, the familiar smell of paper and leather binding welcoming her home. She flipped the sign to closed, though it was only midday. She needed solitude. Moving to the back room that doubled as her living quarters, Florence sank onto her narrow bed, finally allowing the tears to come. It wasn't just the school committee position, it was the constant battle of being herself in a world that demanded she be someone else. Someone quieter, more agreeable less. Florence. After allowing herself precisely 10 minutes of self-pity, she had always been disciplined. Even in her despair, Florence dried her eyes and moved to her small writing desk. She pulled out the weathered leather journal her father had given her for her 16th birthday. "When the world won't listen," he had said with a wink, "make sure you still have somewhere to speak your mind." The journal was nearly full now, filled with her thoughts, observations, and increasingly, her plans to leave Wood River. Perhaps it was time to seriously consider those plans. Denver, or even San Francisco, places where a woman with ideas might find more welcoming soil in which to plant them. Florence began to write, the scratch of her pen against paper gradually soothing her wounded spirit. So absorbed was she in pouring out her frustrations that she didn't hear the bell above the shop door jingle or the heavy footsteps crossing the wooden floor. "Hello? Anybody here?" The deep voice startled her. Florence quickly closed her journal and stood, smoothing her skirts and hoping her eyes weren't too red from crying. She stepped into the main area of the shop to find a stranger examining a shelf of books. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of a life lived outdoors. Dark hair curled beneath a wide-brimmed hat that he respectfully removed as she entered. His clothes were trail-worn but clean denim pants, a simple shirt, and a leather vest. A gun belt hung low on his hips, marking him as someone accustomed to the dangers of the frontier. "I'm sorry," Florence said, professional despite her earlier distress. "I've closed early today." The stranger turned, and Florence found herself looking into the warmest brown eyes she'd ever seen. They crinkled at the corners as he smiled, revealing a small dimple in his right cheek. "My apologies, madam. I didn't notice the sign." His voice had a slight drawl that suggested Texas or perhaps somewhere farther south. "I was hoping to find a particular book. I can come back tomorrow." Something in his manner, the genuine respect with which he addressed her perhaps, or the lack of judgment in his gaze made Florence reconsider. "What book are you looking for, Mr. Thornton?" "Ethan Thornton." He extended a calloused hand, then seemed to think better of it and awkwardly dropped it back to his side. "I've been trying to find a copy of Thoreau's Walden. My last one met with an unfortunate accident involving a creek crossing and a temperamental mule." Florence couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. "Thoreau? That's not the usual request I get from cowboys passing through." Ethan's eyes sparkled with amusement. "I suppose not. Most of the boys I ride with prefer dime novels about wild gunfights and daring outlaws. But I've always found Thoreau's thoughts on living deliberately to be good company on the trail." Florence's interest was piqued. She moved to a shelf near the back of the store, her fingers dancing over the spines until she found what she was looking for. "You're in luck, Mr. Thornton. I happen to have one copy left." She pulled out the book and handed it to him. "Are you passing through Wood River, then?" Ethan took the book, handling it with unexpected gentleness for hands so clearly used to rough work. "Not exactly. I've taken a job at the Taylor Ranch outside town." Form in position. I'm planning to stay a while, God willing and the creek don't rise. Florence nodded, trying not to show her surprise. The Taylor Ranch was one of the largest in the county, and the foreman position was not given lightly. This man must be more than just a drifting cowboy with a taste for philosophy. Well, Mr. Thornton, Wood River will be an experience for you. She couldn't keep a hint of bitterness from her voice. Ethan glanced up from examining the book, his eyes suddenly keen. Sounds like there might be a story there. No story, just a town like any other, I suppose. Florence moved behind the counter, suddenly eager to complete the transaction and be alone again. That will be 75 cents. Ethan reached into his pocket and produced the coins, placing them carefully on the counter. As Florence reached for them, he spoke again. I was at the square earlier. Heard what happened with the mayor. Florence's hand froze above the coins. She felt heat rise to her cheeks, not embarrassment this time, but defensive anger. Have you come to gawk at the town spectacle, then? The unruly woman who doesn't know her place? Instead of the disapproval she expected, Ethan's expression showed something that looked remarkably like admiration. Actually, I thought what you did took courage. Standing up to power isn't easy, especially when you're standing alone. Florence stared at him, momentarily speechless. In all her years of challenging Wood River's status quo, she could count on one hand the number of people who had supported her publicly. Well, she finally managed. Thank you for that, Mr. Thornton. But I'm afraid courage doesn't count for much in Wood River if it comes wrapped in petticoats. Ethan smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached all the way to those warm brown eyes. Maybe what this town needs is more courage in petticoats, Miss O'Malley. Florence O'Malley. Miss O'Malley. He nodded, placing his hat back on his head. I have a feeling Wood River is going to be more interesting than I expected. As he turned to leave, book in hand, he paused at the door. You know, Thoreau also wrote that the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. Seems to me the desperate ones aren't the folks speaking out, but the ones too afraid to say what needs saying. With that, he tipped his hat and was gone, leaving Florence staring after him, wondering if she had just met the first person in Wood River who didn't think she needed to change. That night, Florence dreamed of brown eyes and philosophical cowboys, and for the first time in months, she woke with a sense of possibility rather than resignation. The following week passed in a blur of routine for Florence. She opened the bookshop each morning, helped the occasional customer, ordered new inventory, and closed each evening. But beneath this ordinary routine, something had shifted. The encounter with Ethan Thornton had planted a small seed of hope that perhaps there were people who valued her voice rather than wishing to silence it. On Thursday afternoon, as Florence was arranging a new display of adventure novels, the bell above the door announced a customer. She turned, expecting Mrs. Peterson coming for her weekly romantic novel, but instead found herself face to face with Ethan Thornton once again. Mr. Thornton, she greeted him, surprised at how pleased she felt to see him again. How are you finding Thoreau this time around? Ethan smiled, removing his hat as he stepped fully into the shop. His clothes were dustier than before, evidence of a day's hard work at the ranch, but his eyes were just as warm. Like visiting an old friend, he replied. Though I must admit, I've been thinking more about what you said than about Thoreau's musings on bean fields. Florence raised an eyebrow. What I said? About courage not counting for much in petticoats. He moved further into the shop, examining the new display with genuine interest. It got me thinking about my mother. She was a lot like you, I reckon, had opinions about everything and wasn't shy about sharing them. And how did that work out for her? Florence couldn't help asking, genuinely curious. A shadow passed over Ethan's face. not always well. We lived in a small town in Texas. Folks there had pretty fixed ideas about a woman's place, but my father always said her fire was what made her special. His expression softened. She died when I was 15. Fever took her. But I remember how she'd stand up at town meetings just like you did, speaking her mind even when the men tried to shout her down. Florence felt a kinship with this unknown woman. She sounds remarkable. She was. Ethan picked up one of the adventure novels, turning it over in his hands. She taught me that the loudest voice isn't always the rightest, and that sometimes the voice that needs hearing most is the one folks are trying hardest to silence. Florence felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. Your mother raised a thoughtful son, Mr. Thornton. Ethan, please. He set the book down and met her eyes. Actually, I didn't come in for another book today. I came to ask if you might join me for supper at the hotel restaurant this evening. That is, if you don't have other plans. The invitation caught Florence completely off guard. She hadn't been asked to dinner by a man in over 2 years, not since she'd publicly debated Reverend Simmons on whether the Bible truly supported the subjugation of women, causing her last suitor to flee in embarrassment. Supper, she repeated, stalling as her mind raced. Part of her was immediately suspicious. Was this some elaborate joke orchestrated by the townspeople? But looking into Ethan's earnest expression, she couldn't detect any deceit. Yes, supper, he confirmed with a slight smile. I promise my table manners are passable despite the trail dust. Florence found herself smiling back. I'm not concerned about your manners, Mr. Thornton, Ethan. I'm more concerned about what associating with me might do to your reputation in town. I'm not exactly beloved by the good people of Wood River. Ethan shrugged, unconcerned. I've never put much stock in what others think of me or my associates. I prefer to make those judgments for myself. He paused, then added more seriously, but if you're not interested, I understand completely. No, Florence said quickly, surprising herself with her eagerness. I mean yes. Yes, I would like to join you for supper. Ethan's face lit up with a smile that made something flutter in Florence's chest. Wonderful. Shall I call for you at 6? The shop closes at 5, Florence replied. I'll need time to change. Perhaps 6:30 would be better. 6:30 it is. Ethan placed his hat back on his head, still smiling. I look forward to it, Miss O'Malley. Florence, please, she replied, feeling suddenly shy in a way she hadn't since girlhood. Florence, he repeated, as if testing the name. Until this evening, then. After he left, Florence found herself staring at the door, her heart beating faster than normal. A dinner invitation shouldn't feel so momentous, and yet it did. Perhaps because it had been offered without conditions, no suggestions that she temper her opinions or moderate her speech. Just an invitation from a man who seemed to appreciate her exactly as she was. At precisely 6:30, a knock came at the bookshop's back door, which led to Florence's living quarters. She had spent an uncharacteristic amount of time preparing for the evening, finally settling on her best dress, a deep green that brought out the blue of her eyes. She had even taken extra care with her hair, arranging the chestnut waves in a style that was elegant but not too formal. When she opened the door, she found Ethan waiting, looking transformed from the dusty cowboy of that afternoon. He had cleaned up impressively, wearing a dark suit that, while not new, was well maintained. His dark hair was neatly combed and he had trimmed his beard. He held his hat in his hands, and there was something endearingly nervous about the way he shifted his weight as he waited. Miss O'Malley, Florence, he corrected himself, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance. You look beautiful. The simple compliment, delivered with such genuine appreciation, brought a flush to Florence's cheeks. Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Ethan. He offered his arm with a small bow that was playful rather than mocking. "Shall we?" Florence took his arm, enjoying the solid strength of it beneath her hand. As they walked toward the hotel, she was acutely aware of the curious stares from passers-by. Florence O'Malley, walking arm in arm with a handsome stranger, it was fodder for gossip that would last at least until Sunday's church service. "People are staring," she murmured, not wanting him to be caught unawares. Ethan glanced around, then looked down at her with a mischievous glint in his eye. "Let them. Maybe they'll learn something about judging books by their covers." The hotel restaurant was Wood River's finest dining establishment, which wasn't saying much compared to bigger cities, but it was certainly a step above the saloon or the small cafe at the general store. When they entered, Florence immediately spotted Mayor Holloway and his wife at a corner table. The mayor's eyebrows shot up at the sight of her on Ethan's arm. The maitre d' led them to a table near the window, and Ethan pulled out Florence's chair for her with an easy courtesy that spoke of good upbringing despite his current occupation. "I must admit," Florence said once they were seated, "I'm curious about how a man who quotes Thoreau ends up as a ranch foreman in Nebraska." Ethan smiled, unfolding his napkin. "It's not such a strange path when you consider that Thoreau himself sought to live close to nature. But the simple version is that I grew up on a small ranch, learned the trade from my father, and found I had a knack for it. After he passed, I sold our place and took to working larger spreads. The reading came from my mother. She was a school teacher before she married my father." "That explains the Thoreau," Florence nodded, "but not how you ended up in Wood River specifically." "Ah, well, that's a matter of reputation and luck. I worked for the Bartleby spread in Wyoming for 5 years, worked my way up to foreman there. When old man Taylor decided he needed someone new to run his operation, he asked around. My name came up." Ethan shrugged modestly. "I was ready for a change of scenery, so here I am." Their conversation was interrupted by the waiter taking their orders. Once he had gone, Ethan turned the questions back to Florence. "And you? Have you always been in the book business?" Florence nodded. "My father opened the shop when I was just a girl. He came west from Boston with dreams of bringing literature to the frontier. My mother thought him terribly impractical, but she loved him for it." A sad smile crossed her face at the memory. "After she died, it was just the two of us. He taught me everything: how to order stock, keep the accounts, recommend the right book to the right person. When he passed 3 years ago, continuing the shop seemed the natural thing to do." "He sounds like a remarkable man," Ethan said softly. "He was. He encouraged my reading, my thinking, my outspokenness." Florence's expression turned wistful. "He used to say that a mind is like a muscle, it needs exercise to grow strong. He never understood why the town thought a woman's mind should remain weak while a man's should grow strong." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "My father had similar ideas. He'd say, 'Ethan, find yourself a woman who challenges your thinking, not one who just echoes it.' He and my mother would have the most spirited debates over dinner. As a boy, I thought all marriages were like that." "And now?" Florence couldn't help asking. "Now I know they're rare," he answered, his gaze steady on hers, "but all the more valuable for their rarity." The waiter returned with their meals: roast beef for Ethan, chicken for Florence, momentarily breaking the intensity of the moment. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily between them, touching on books they had both read, places they had visited, and observations about life in a small frontier town. Florence found herself laughing more than she had in months. Ethan had a dry wit that caught her by surprise, and he seemed genuinely interested in her opinions, asking questions that showed he was truly listening to her answers. "So," he said as they were finishing their dessert apple pie that the hotel was known for. Tell me about this school committee position. Why is it so important to you? Florence took a sip of her coffee, considering how to explain. Wood River's school is adequate for the boys. They learn mathematics, history, science, all the subjects they'll need to pursue further education or enter business. But the girls... She shook her head in frustration. The girls are taught just enough reading and arithmetic to manage a household budget and read the Bible. Anything more is considered unnecessary or even harmful. And you disagree, Ethan prompted. Of course I disagree. Florence's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. She lowered it again with effort. Girls have minds just as capable as boys. They deserve the same opportunities to develop them. My father educated me as he would have educated a son, and look at me, I run a successful business. I read philosophy and science. I can debate politics with any man in town. And that frightens them, Ethan observed. Yes, Florence sighed. A woman who thinks for herself might start expecting to vote next, or own property in her own name, or worse, teach other women to do the same. Ethan chuckled. The horror. His teasing tone made Florence smile despite her frustration. I thought if I could get on the committee, I might gradually influence the curriculum. Show them that educating girls fully doesn't lead to moral collapse or the destruction of family life. It's a worthy goal, Ethan said seriously. And from what I've seen, you're exactly the right person to champion it. Florence felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the coffee. Thank you for saying that. Most people in town think I should focus on finding a husband and having children instead of trying to change things. Why not both? Ethan asked. My mother managed to be a wife, a mother, and a force for change in our community. Florence had no immediate answer. She had grown so accustomed to thinking of marriage as something that would silence her voice that she hadn't considered the possibility of finding a partner who would amplify it instead. As they left the restaurant, the night air had turned cool, and Ethan gallantly offered Florence his jacket. It was warm from his body and smelled faintly of soap and leather. They walked slowly back toward the bookshop, neither seeming in a hurry to end the evening. I've enjoyed this evening more than I can say, Ethan said as they reached her door. Would you allow me to call on you again? Florence looked up at him, this strange cowboy who quoted Thoreau and seemed to value rather than fear her mind. I would like that very much. Ethan smiled, and for a moment Florence thought he might kiss her. Instead, he took her hand and raised it gently to his lips. Good night, Florence O'Malley. Your voice is what this world needs, even if Wood River isn't ready to hear it yet. With those words, he released her hand, tipped his hat, and walked away into the night, leaving Florence with a fluttering heart and the strange sensation that her life had just changed irrevocably. The following Sunday, Florence sat in her usual pew at the back of the church, trying to ignore the whispers and glances being cast her way. News of her dinner with Ethan had spread through Wood River like wildfire, igniting speculation that ranged from romantic to scandalous. I heard he's a gunslinger on the run, Mrs. Peterson whispered loudly to Mrs. Donnelly in the pew ahead. Well, I heard he's actually quite educated, Mrs. Donnelly replied. Martha at the hotel said he spoke about books all through dinner. A man like that with Florence O'Malley, Mrs. Peterson clucked her tongue. He'll soon tire of her sharp tongue and unconventional ways. Florence kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. But inside, a small doubt gnawed at her. Would Ethan tire of her? Was this just a passing curiosity on his part, the novelty of a woman who spoke her mind? Her thoughts were interrupted by a stir at the church entrance. Ethan Thornton walked in, looking slightly uncomfortable in a clean suit but undeniably handsome. His eyes scanned the congregation until they found her, and his face brightened with a smile that made several of the church ladies fan themselves vigorously. To Florence's surprise and the obvious shock of the congregation, Ethan made his way directly to her pew and gestured questioningly to the empty space beside her. Florence nodded, trying to suppress her own smile as he sat down next to her. "Morning," he whispered, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Hope I'm not interrupting your spiritual contemplation." "Not at all," she whispered back, "though you've certainly given the congregation something new to contemplate." Indeed, Reverend Simmons seemed momentarily flustered to see Wood River's most controversial daughter paired with the handsome newcomer. He shuffled his notes longer than usual before beginning his sermon, which to Florence's amusement seemed hastily adjusted to include more emphasis on traditional gender roles than originally planned. Throughout the service, Florence was acutely aware of Ethan beside her, the clean scent of his soap, the warmth radiating from his body, the way his arm occasionally brushed against hers when he shifted position. It was both distracting and oddly comforting to have him there, a silent ally in a place where she had long felt judged. After the service, Florence steeled herself for the social gauntlet of the church steps, where the congregation typically gathered to exchange pleasantries, and often less pleasant observations. To her surprise, Ethan stayed firmly at her side, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back as they navigated the crowd. "Miss O'Malley," Mayor Holloway approached, his wife on his arm. "And Mr. Thornton, isn't it? I understand you've taken the foreman position at the Taylor Ranch." "That's right, sir," Ethan replied with polite deference that nonetheless held a hint of steel. "Been there about 2 weeks now, and already finding time for social engagements." Mrs. Holloway's gaze flicked meaningfully between Ethan and Florence. "Yes, madam." Ethan's smile was pleasant but firm. "Miss O'Malley has been kind enough to provide both literary recommendations and delightful company. Wood River is fortunate to have such an intelligent and principled woman among its citizens." Florence felt a rush of gratitude at his public defense of her character, something few in Wood River had ever offered. "Well," Mayor Holloway harumphed, clearly taken aback, "that's one perspective, I suppose. You might find that Miss O'Malley's principles often put her at odds with the town's best interests. Or perhaps," Ethan suggested mildly, "they simply challenge the town to live up to its best ideals. Good day, Mayor, Mrs. Holloway." With that, he guided Florence away, leaving the mayor sputtering behind them. Once they were out of earshot, Florence couldn't contain her laughter any longer. "Did you see his face?" she gasped, eyes dancing with mirth. "I don't think anyone has ever suggested that my troublemaking might be virtuous before." Ethan laughed with her, the sound rich and warm. "It's not troublemaking to speak truth, Florence, and the mayor knows it, which is probably why he looked like he'd swallowed a lemon." They walked together toward the bookshop, Florence's spirits lighter than they had been in years. It wasn't just Ethan's defense of her, though that had been wonderful, but the simple pleasure of not facing the Sunday judgment alone. "Would you care to join me for dinner?" she asked impulsively as they reached the shop. "Nothing fancy like the hotel, just a simple meal. I'm a passable cook, despite what the town ladies might think about my domestic skills." Ethan's smile was answer enough, but he added, "I'd be honored. Though I should warn you, my standards were set by trail cooks. So passable to you might be a feast to me." The afternoon passed in easy companionship as Florence prepared a chicken stew with dumplings, one of her father's favorite meals. Ethan insisted on helping, and though his knife skills were clearly honed on different tasks than chopping vegetables, his willingness to try charmed her. They ate at the small table in Florence's living quarters behind the shop, the space that had once seemed lonely now feeling cozy with Ethan's presence filling it. Their conversation ranged widely again from books to ranching, from childhood memories to future hopes. "I've been thinking about what you said about the school," Ethan said as they finished their meal. "About wanting to change the curriculum for the girls." Florence nodded, curious about where he was going with this. "Well, the committee position isn't the only way to educate girls. Have you ever considered offering reading groups or informal classes here at the shop? A sort of supplementary education for girls who want more than the school offers." Florence blinked, surprised she hadn't thought of it herself. "That's actually a brilliant idea. I could offer sessions after school hours or on Saturdays." "The shop already has the books," Ethan pointed out, "and you have the knowledge. No committee approval needed." "The parents might object," Florence mused, though her mind was already racing with possibilities. "Some might," Ethan agreed, "but I suspect there are at least a few in town who want more for their daughters than just preparing them for marriage. Start small, prove the concept, and let it grow naturally." Florence felt a surge of excitement. "I could begin with literature, perhaps, which seems less threatening than mathematics or science, and then gradually introduce other subjects." "Exactly." Ethan's eyes were warm with admiration. "Create the change you want to see, rather than waiting for permission from people determined not to give it." Florence reached across the table and impulsively squeezed his hand. "Thank you for seeing possibilities where I was only seeing obstacles." Ethan turned his hand to clasp hers, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Sometimes it takes an outside perspective, but the vision and the courage, those are all yours, Florence." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Florence felt something shift between them, a deepening of connection that sent a pleasant shiver through her. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan raised her hand to his lips, just as he had the night of their first dinner. But this time, his kiss lingered and his eyes never left hers. "Florence O'Malley," he said softly, "I think you might be the most remarkable woman I've ever met." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Florence's life. Ethan called on her regularly, sometimes for planned outings, other times just stopping by the bookshop when his duties at the ranch allowed. Their connection deepened with each meeting, and Florence found herself thinking about him at odd moments throughout her days, wondering what he would think of a particular book, or imagining his laugh at something amusing she'd observed. Meanwhile, her idea for supplementary education for girls had taken shape. She began with a Saturday afternoon reading circle, posting a small notice in the shop window. To her delight, 4 girls showed up the first week, including Eliza Taylor, the 12-year-old daughter of Ethan's employer. "Father says Mr. Thornton told him about your class," Eliza explained shyly when Florence asked what had brought her to the circle. "He said you know more about books than anyone in 3 counties." Florence felt a warm glow at the knowledge that Ethan was championing her efforts even when they weren't together. The reading circle gradually expanded to include discussions of history and even basic scientific principles. Some parents objected, of course. Mrs. Abernathy made it known throughout town that she considered Florence's unauthorized teaching to be a dangerous undermining of proper educational authority. But enough parents saw the sparkle in their daughters' eyes when they discussed the books and ideas from Florence's circle that the criticism remained just talk rather than action. One sunny afternoon in late May, Florence was just concluding a session with 6 eager girls when Ethan appeared at the shop door, looking more serious than usual. "Ladies," He greeted the girls with a tip of his hat. "Having a good lesson?" "Oh yes, Mr. Thornton," young Sally Pearson exclaimed. "Miss O'Malley's been telling us about ancient Egypt and the woman Pharaoh Hatshepsut who ruled disguised as a man." "Fascinating," Ethan said, his expression softening as he looked at their enthusiastic faces. "I hope you'll tell me more about her sometime." As the girls gathered their things and said their goodbyes, Florence noticed that Ethan remained tense despite his smile for the children. Once they were alone, she approached him with concern. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "You seem troubled." Ethan sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his agitation. "There's going to be a town council meeting tonight. Mayor Holloway's put forward a proposal to regulate unauthorized educational gatherings within town limits." Florence felt her stomach drop. "He's trying to stop my reading circles." "Yes." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Apparently Mrs. Abernathy has been bending his ear about the radical ideas you're putting in the girls' heads. The proposal would require any educational gathering to be approved by the school committee, which she sits on," Florence finished, anger beginning to replace her initial shock. "Of course. They couldn't stop me from teaching directly, so they'll use bureaucracy instead." "The meeting's at 7, Ethan said. "I thought you should know in advance so you could prepare if you wanted to speak." Florence began pacing the small shop, her mind racing. "This is about more than just my reading circles. This is about controlling what ideas are acceptable in Wood River, about keeping girls from aspiring to more than marriage and motherhood." "I know," Ethan said softly, "and that's why your voice needs to be heard tonight more than ever." Florence stopped pacing and looked at him, really looked at him, this man who had come into her life so unexpectedly and who consistently encouraged her to be more herself, not less. "Will you be there?" she asked, surprised by how much his answer mattered to her. Ethan moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away. But Florence," his expression grew solemn, "you should know that standing with you publicly like this, it's going to make certain elements in town unhappy with me too." Mr. Taylor's already had some comments about his foreman keeping company with Wood River's most controversial daughter. Florence felt a pang of guilt. "Ethan, I never meant to cause problems for you. Your job is important to me," he finished for her. "But not as important as standing for what's right. Not as important as you." The last word hung in the air between them, laden with meaning that neither had fully expressed until now. Florence felt her heart beating faster as Ethan's hands tightened gently around hers. "Ethan," she began, not sure what she wanted to say, but feeling that something momentous was happening between them. "I love you, Florence O'Malley," Ethan said simply, the words falling from his lips as naturally as if he'd been saying them all his life. "I love your fierce intelligence, your courage, your unwillingness to be less than who you are. I've known it since that day at the Founders' Day celebration when you stood up to the mayor while everyone else stood silent." Florence felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the earnestness in his face and the words she had begun to fear she might never hear from anyone. "I love you too," she whispered, the admission both terrifying and liberating. "I love that you really see me when everyone else in this town just sees a problem to be fixed." Ethan's smile could have lit the darkest night. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question asked and answered, but it deepened as Florence responded, her hands moving to his shoulders as his slid around her waist. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Ethan pressed his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens tonight, whatever the town decides, we'll face it together. Your voice is what this world needs, Florence, and I'll stand beside you while you raise it." Florence felt stronger in that moment than she ever had before, not because Ethan would fight her battles for her, but because, for the first time, she didn't have to fight them alone. The town hall was packed that evening, word having spread quickly about the proposal. Florence and Ethan entered together, his hand a reassuring presence at the small of her back. They found seats near the front. Ignoring the whispers that followed them down the aisle, Mayor Holloway called the meeting to order with a bang of his gavel. First item of business is Ordinance 27, regarding the regulation of educational gatherings within town limits. He proceeded to read the proposed ordinance, which was exactly as restrictive as Ethan had warned any gathering of 3 or more children under 18 for educational purposes would require approval from the school committee, with detailed lesson plans submitted in advance. "This is a matter of ensuring consistent educational standards," the mayor concluded smoothly, "and protecting our children from potentially harmful or unsuitable material. Does anyone wish to speak on this matter before the council votes?" Florence stood, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. "I would like to speak, Mayor Holloway." The mayor's lips thinned with displeasure, but he nodded reluctantly. "Miss O'Malley, the floor is yours. Briefly, if you please." Florence moved to the front of the hall, acutely aware of all eyes upon her. She spotted Mrs. Abernathy in the front row, looking smugly confident of victory. But she also saw young Eliza Taylor and her father, Sally Pearson with her parents, and several other families whose daughters had attended her reading circles. "Fellow citizens of Wood River," Florence began, her voice clear and steady. "This proposed ordinance is being presented as a matter of educational standards, but let's be honest about what it really is: an attempt to stop the reading circles I've been conducting at my bookshop." A murmur ran through the crowd at her directness. "If there are concerns about the content of these circles, I invite anyone, especially the members of the school committee, to attend and observe. They will find girls reading literature, discussing history, and yes, learning that women throughout time have been capable of remarkable achievements when given the chance to develop their minds." Mrs. Abernathy stood, unable to contain herself. "It's precisely those radical notions that concern us, Miss O'Malley. Filling girls' heads with ideas above their station leads only to discontent and the neglect of their proper duties." "And what station would that be, Mrs. Abernathy?" Florence countered. "The same station that told Catherine the Great she couldn't rule Russia. The same station that told Florence Nightingale she couldn't revolutionize nursing. The same station that told the women of this very town they couldn't organize to protect their families when the men were drinking away their wages." A few uncomfortable coughs came from the men who remembered that particular episode in Wood River's history. "Education doesn't make women discontent with their proper duties," Florence continued. "It helps them perform all their duties better, whether as mothers, teachers, businesswomen, or citizens. The real fear here isn't that educated girls will neglect their duties, it's that they might question why certain duties are considered theirs alone, or why their voices matter less than men's in determining the future of this community." Florence glanced at Ethan, drawing strength from his encouraging nod. "Wood River stands at a crossroads. We can move forward, embracing the full potential of all our citizens, or we can cling to limitations that serve no one, not even the men who think they benefit from them. Because a community that silences half its voices is only half as wise, half as innovative, and half as strong as it could be." She turned to address the mayor directly. "This ordinance isn't about educational standards. It's about fear of change, fear of women's voices, Fear that if girls learn they can think for themselves, they might actually do it. I urge the council to reject this fear, and instead embrace the possibility that Wood River might become known not just as another frontier town, but as a place of progress and enlightenment where all minds are valued. As Florence returned to her seat, the hall erupted in a mixture of applause and objections. Ethan squeezed her hand, pride evident in his eyes. "Anyone else wish to speak?" Mayor Holloway asked, clearly hoping to move quickly to the vote where he had the council firmly in his pocket. To everyone's surprise, Mr. Taylor, the ranch owner and one of the wealthiest men in the county, rose to his feet. "I'd like to say something, if I may." The mayor nodded, looking slightly nervous. Taylor was a major contributor to the town's coffers and not a man to be dismissed lightly. "My Eliza has been attending Miss O'Malley's reading circle for several weeks now," Taylor began in his gravelly voice. "And I must say, I've never seen the girl so excited about learning. She comes home full of stories and ideas, asking questions I can't always answer." He chuckled softly. "My late wife would have loved to see it. She always said our Eliza had a quick mind, one that deserved nurturing." He looked around the hall, his expression growing serious. "I'm not an educated man myself, learned most of what I know through hard work and harder mistakes. But I want more for my daughter. If she's to inherit my ranch someday, as I intend, she'll need more than just a pretty face and good manners. She'll need a mind sharp enough to manage accounts, negotiate cattle prices, and yes, stand her ground when men try to take advantage of her." Florence felt a surge of hope as Taylor continued, his plain-spoken manner seeming to resonate with many in the crowd. "This ordinance claims to protect our children, but from what? From books, from ideas, from the kind of thinking that built this nation." Taylor shook his head. "I say we need more people like Miss O'Malley in Wood River, not fewer. People willing to invest their time and knowledge in our children without asking anything in return except the freedom to do it." When Taylor sat down, the mood in the hall had noticeably shifted. Several other parents of Florence's students stood to speak in favor of her reading circles, describing the positive changes they'd seen in their daughter's confidence and intellect. Finally, Ethan stood. "Mayor Holloway, may I address the council?" The mayor, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the turn the meeting had taken, nodded curtly. "My name is Ethan Thornton, foreman at the Taylor Ranch," he began, his deep voice carrying easily through the hall. "I'm relatively new to Wood River, so perhaps it's not my place to speak on town matters, but sometimes an outside perspective can be valuable." He looked around the hall, making eye contact with various citizens. "I've worked in communities across the Western Territories, and the ones that thrive are invariably those that welcome new ideas and make use of all their citizens' talents, not just half of them. The ones that stagnate or die are those that fear change, that silence voices offering fresh perspectives." Ethan's gaze found Florence, and his expression softened. "When I first came to Wood River, I witnessed Miss O'Malley speaking truth to power at great personal cost. While others muttered their discontent in private, she had the courage to stand alone and speak openly. That's not a quality to be punished or silenced, it's one to be admired and encouraged." He turned back to the council. "The question before you tonight isn't really about educational standards. It's about what kind of community Wood River wants to be. One that fears ideas or one that embraces them. One that silences its daughters or one that amplifies their voices." As Ethan returned to his seat, Mayor Holloway cleared his throat, clearly sensing that the tide had turned against his proposal. "Well, we've heard quite a range of opinions tonight. Perhaps this matter requires further consideration before call the vote. Bartholomew, Mrs. Taylor's elderly mother called from her seat near the back. "Some of us would like to get home before midnight." Trapped, the mayor called for the vote. To Florence's astonishment and delight, the ordinance was defeated 4-3, with one council member, who had clearly intended to vote in favor, changing his mind after the public testimonies. As the meeting adjourned, Florence found herself surrounded by well-wishers' parents thanking her for her work with their daughters, girls excited about future reading circles, and even a few townspeople who had never spoken to her before expressing newfound respect for her conviction. Through it all, Ethan remained at her side, his quiet strength a counterpoint to her elation. When they finally managed to extract themselves from the crowd, they walked slowly back toward the bookshop under a canopy of stars, their hands intertwined. "I can hardly believe what happened tonight," Florence said, still processing the victory. "For the first time since I can remember, I feel like I might actually belong in Wood River." Ethan squeezed her hand. "You've always belonged here, Florence. The town just needed to catch up to you." They reached the bookshop, but neither seemed eager to say goodnight. Instead, they stood facing each other in the pool of light from the street lamp, the night air cool but not uncomfortable. "What happens now?" Florence asked softly, uncertain not about the reading circles but about this fragile, beautiful thing growing between them. Ethan took both her hands in his expression serious but warm. "What happens now is entirely up to you, Florence. But I hope that whatever path you choose, you might consider walking it with me beside you." Florence felt her breath catch. "Ethan, are you not yet?" he said with a small smile. "When I ask that question, I want to do it properly, but I am asking if you'd be open to the possibility someday. If you'd let me court you officially with that future in mind." Florence felt tears of happiness pricking at her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to courting, yes to possibilities, yes to someday." Ethan's smile was radiant as he drew her close and kissed her, a promise of tomorrows sealed beneath the Nebraska stars. The summer of 1876 bloomed bright and golden across the plains of Nebraska, and with it, Florence and Ethan's courtship flourished openly. What had begun as a tentative connection deepened into something neither had expected to find, especially not in a place like Wood River. Florence's reading circles expanded to 3 sessions a week, with different groups divided by age and interest. To her surprise, she even received a visit from Mrs. Peterson, who sheepishly asked if her granddaughter, visiting from Omaha, might join the sessions during her stay. "She's a bright girl," Mrs. Peterson admitted. "Too bright for her own good, her mother says. Reminds me of you a bit." Always questioning. Coming from a woman who had once crossed the street to avoid speaking to Florence, it was high praise indeed. The most remarkable change, however, came in early July, when Florence received a formal letter from the school board. Opening it with trepidation, expecting perhaps another attempt to curtail her educational efforts, she was stunned to read an invitation to present a proposal for supplementary educational materials for the girls' curriculum at the next board meeting. "They're actually asking for my input," she told Ethan that evening as they sat on the small bench behind the bookshop, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "After years of dismissing everything I've suggested." Ethan smiled, his arm comfortable around her shoulders. "They finally realized what I knew from the start, that your voice is valuable, especially when it challenges them to be better." Florence leaned her head against his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," she admitted. "For the town to turn against me again, or for you to realize you've made a terrible mistake in choosing the most difficult woman in Nebraska." Ethan chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her cheek. "The only mistake would be not appreciating exactly who you are," Florence O'Malley. And as for the town, people can change when given reason and time. You've given them both. August brought the county fair, and with it, a chance for Florence and Ethan to enjoy themselves away from the scrutiny of Wood River. They spent a blissful day exploring the exhibitions, sampling carnival foods, and watching horse races. Ethan won a small stuffed bear at a shooting gallery and presented it to Florence with a flourish that made her laugh. As the sun began to set, Ethan suggested they take a turn on the newly constructed Ferris wheel that was the fair's main attraction. Florence agreed, though with some trepidation about the height. As their car slowly ascended, Ethan took her hand. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he asked, gesturing to the vista spreading before them, rolling plains gilded by the setting sun, the distant silhouette of Wood River, and beyond it, the promise of an open horizon. "It is," Florence agreed, finding that her fear of heights diminished in proportion to the tightness of Ethan's grip on her hand. When their car reached the very top, it paused as other passengers were loaded below. Suspended between earth and sky, with the world spread out beneath them, Ethan turned to Florence. "I had a whole speech planned," he said, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous, "about horizons and possibilities and how you've changed my life. But now that we're here, I find I only need to say the simplest truth." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it revealed a delicate gold ring with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "Florence O'Malley, I love you more than I ever thought possible. Your courage, your conviction, your compassion, they humble and inspire me daily. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Florence felt tears spring to her eyes, her heart so full it seemed impossible it could be contained within her chest. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes, 1,000 times yes." Ethan slid the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then pulled her into a kiss that made her forget they were suspended high above the ground. That made her forget everything except the joy of this moment and the promise of all the moments to come. When they descended back to earth, they were greeted by applause from the fairground workers who had witnessed the proposal from below. Florence blushed, but couldn't stop smiling as Ethan proudly announced their engagement to anyone who would listen. As they walked hand in hand through the fairground, Florence admired how the pearl in her ring caught the light of the paper lantern strung overhead. "It's beautiful, Ethan. How did you know I prefer pearls to diamonds?" Ethan smiled, looking pleased with himself. "You mentioned once that your mother had a pearl brooch she treasured, and you said you liked how pearls aren't flashy but have a quiet elegance." He shrugged self-consciously. "I listen when you talk, Florence." It was such a simple statement, but it encompassed so much of why she loved him: his attention to what mattered to her, his respect for her thoughts and preferences, his desire to know her fully rather than to change her. "When should we marry?" she asked as they made their way back to where they had hitched their horses. "That's entirely up to you," Ethan replied. "Though I admit I'm not inclined toward a long engagement." Florence considered. "Autumn would be lovely. October, perhaps." "The bookshop is usually quieter then, before the holiday rush." "October it is," Ethan agreed, helping her mount her horse. 2 months to prepare seems reasonable." As they rode back toward Wood River under a canopy of stars, Florence felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The path ahead would not always be smooth. She was under no illusions about that. There would still be battles to fight, minds to change, progress to champion. But now she would face them with Ethan beside her, his strength complementing hers, his voice joining with hers to create a harmony more powerful than either alone. News of their engagement spread quickly through Wood River. met with reactions ranging from genuine delight to barely concealed surprise that the town's most controversial woman had managed to secure such an eligible bachelor. Florence weathered the gossip with more grace than she might have before Ethan, finding that the joy of their love made the opinions of others matter less than they once had. The wedding preparations proceeded smoothly, with unexpected support coming from quarters Florence had long considered hostile. Mrs. Abernathy, perhaps sensing that her opposition to Florence was increasingly unpopular, made a point of offering her church's ladies' auxiliary to help with the flowers and decorations. Mr. Taylor insisted on hosting the reception at his ranch, the largest and most beautiful property in the county. Even Mayor Holloway, ever sensitive to shifting political winds, presented the couple with an elaborate silver tea service on behalf of the grateful citizens of Wood River. "Grateful for what, I wonder?" Florence murmured to Ethan after the mayor had departed. "That you're taking the troublesome spinster off their hands," Ethan laughed, pulling her close. "More likely grateful that you're staying. I suspect even the mayor has realized that Wood River is better with you than without you, though he'd rather swallow his pocket watch than admit it." September passed in a flurry of preparations. Florence continued her reading circles and worked on her proposal for the school board, determined that her marriage would not mean abandoning her educational mission. Ethan divided his time between his duties at the ranch and helping Florence prepare the living quarters above the bookshop, which would be their home until they could build something of their own. One unseasonably warm evening in late September, Florence was organizing her books when Ethan arrived with a mysterious smile and a request that she come with him. "Where are we going?" she asked as he helped her into the wagon he had driven to town. "It's a surprise," was all he would say, his eyes twinkling with secrets. They drove west out of town, following the river that gave Wood River its name. After about 2 miles, Ethan turned onto a smaller trail that led to a rise overlooking a bend in the river. There, to Florence's astonishment, stood the wooden frame of a small house, its skeleton outlined against the sunset sky. "Ethan," she questioned, her heart beginning to race. He helped her down from the wagon and led her toward the structure. "Mr. Taylor offered me a piece of his land as an engagement present. Said his foreman ought to have a proper home, especially one with such a remarkable wife." Florence walked slowly around the frame, trying to absorb what she was seeing. "You're building us a house." "We're building us a home," Ethan corrected gently. "I've got the frame up, but there's still plenty to be done, I thought. I hoped you'd want to be part of the decisions. Where the windows should go to catch the best light for reading, how big the kitchen should be. Whether we need 1 bedroom or—" He paused, a question in his eyes. "Or more," Florence finished softly, her heart full. "For children someday," Ethan nodded, drawing her close. "I was thinking 2 extra at least. 1 for a boy who might want to learn ranching, and 1 for a girl who'll no doubt inherit her mother's passion for books and justice." Florence laughed, tears of happiness blurring her vision. "Or perhaps a boy who loves books and a girl who wants to ride the range. With us as parents, who knows what they might choose to be." "Exactly," Ethan agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "They'll be free to find their own voices, just as you fought for others to do." Standing there in the skeleton of their future home, with the river flowing steadily below and the first stars appearing above, Florence felt a sense of coming full circle. The girl who had been told her whole life to be quieter, smaller, less herself had found not just acceptance but celebration of her true nature. And more than that, she had found a partner who wanted not to tame her fire but to tend it, to help it burn brighter and warmer for having a place where it belonged. "I love you, Ethan Thornton," she said, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his chest. "And I love our future home." "And I love you, Florence O'Malley," he replied, his voice rumbling pleasantly against her cheek. "Soon to be Florence Thornton, though I expect you'll keep right on being exactly who you are, name change or no." "Count on it," she said with a smile, reaching up to kiss him as the first stars of evening winked into life above the home they would build together. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, a perfect October Saturday with just enough autumn chill to turn the leaves to gold and red, but not enough to make outdoor festivities uncomfortable. Florence woke early in the small bedroom above her bookshop, knowing it would be the last morning she would wake there as Florence O'Malley. Eliza Taylor arrived with her grandmother to help Florence dress, the girl chattering excitedly about the decorations at the ranch, and how her father had insisted on importing flowers all the way from Omaha for the occasion. "And Mr. Thornton has been as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs," Eliza confided as she helped arrange Florence's hair. "Dad says he's checked his suit for missing buttons at least 20 times. Florence smiled at the image, finding comfort in the knowledge that Ethan was as affected by the day as she was. Not with doubts, never that, but with the weight of its significance, the knowledge that their lives would be forever marked by before and after this day. Her dress was simple but elegant ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, made by the town's seamstress to Florence's specific design. No massive hoop skirts or bustles for her. She wanted to be able to move freely, to dance with her new husband without impediment. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Taylor said softly when the preparations were complete. "Like a queen." Florence blushed at the compliment, especially coming from a woman who had once crossed the street rather than greet her on the sidewalk. "Thank you for your help," she said sincerely. "It means a great deal to have you here." The older woman patted her hand. "We were wrong about you, Miss O'Malley Florence, many of us, too set in our ways to see that change isn't always something to fear." She glanced at her granddaughter, who was admiring Florence's pearl earrings. "Watching Eliza blossom under your teaching has been educational for me as well." It was as close to an apology as Florence was likely to get, and she accepted it with grace, recognizing the courage it took for someone of Mrs. Taylor's generation to admit to a change of heart. The ceremony was to be held outdoors at the Taylor Ranch, under an ancient oak tree that provided a natural cathedral. As Florence approached in a carriage decorated with autumn flowers, she could see the gathered crowd. Nearly the entire town had turned out, a fact that would have been unthinkable a year ago. And there, waiting beneath the oak, was Ethan. His suit was new, his hair neatly combed, but it was the expression on his face as he saw her that Florence would remember for the rest of her days, a look of such pure joy and wonder that it seemed to illuminate him from within. As her carriage stopped and Mr. Taylor stepped forward to escort her, a role he had requested in the absence of her father, Florence felt a moment of perfect clarity. This man, this day, this life they would build together was exactly where she was meant to be. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Florence would later remember fragments: the warmth of Ethan's hands holding hers, the sincerity in his voice as he recited vows they had written together, the unexpected tears in Reverend Simmons's eyes as he pronounced them husband and wife. And then Ethan was kissing her, and the crowd was applauding, and Florence Thornton stepped into the next chapter of her life with her heart full and her spirit soaring. The reception that followed was more jubilant than Wood River had seen in many years. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by nearly every family in town. A small band played lively tunes that soon had couples of all ages dancing on the wooden platform, Mr. Taylor had constructed for the occasion. Florence and Ethan moved through the celebration in a bubble of shared happiness, accepting congratulations, sharing dances, and exchanging private smiles at moments only they understood. As the afternoon lengthened into evening, Florence found herself momentarily alone, watching Ethan across the gathering as he knelt to speak seriously with a small boy who had brought him a carved wooden horse as a wedding gift. "He's a good man," came a voice beside her, and Florence turned to find Mrs. Abernathy, the woman who had so often been her most vocal critic. "The best I've ever known," Florence agreed, waiting cautiously for whatever might come next. Mrs. Abernathy smoothed her skirts, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Thornton. I've been, perhaps, too rigid in my thinking, too quick to condemn what I didn't understand." Florence was so surprised that for a moment she couldn't respond. "That's very generous of you to say," she finally managed. The older woman shook her head. "Not generous. Necessary. My granddaughter in Lincoln wrote to me last month. She's been accepted to college, one of the first women admitted to the university there." Pride warred with concern in Mrs. Abernathy's voice. "I was frightened for her at first, worried about what such education might mean for her future as a woman." She looked directly at Florence, her gaze steady. "But then I looked at you. Educated, opinionated, unwilling to be silenced, and now married to a man who clearly adores those very qualities I thought would make you unmarriageable. It made me reconsider many things." Florence felt a lump form in her throat. "Your granddaughter is fortunate to have your support. It will mean more to her than you can imagine." Mrs. Abernathy nodded, then straightened her shoulders as if preparing to say something difficult. "The school committee will be reviewing your proposal next week. I want you to know that you have my vote in favor. The girls of Wood River deserve every opportunity we can give them." Before Florence could respond to this astonishing statement, the older woman patted her arm once, awkwardly, and moved away into the crowd. Ethan appeared at her side a moment later, his expression curious. "Was that Mrs. Abernathy having a civil conversation with you?" "The same Mrs. Abernathy who once said you were single-handedly responsible for the moral decline of Wood River's youth," Florence laughed, still processing what had just happened. "The very same. Apparently, moral decline is contagious. She's just promised to support my school proposal." Ethan whistled low. "Miracles never cease." He drew her closer, his arms slipping around her waist. "Though I'm not surprised. You have a way of changing minds, Florence Thornton. Of helping people see possibilities they couldn't imagine before." "We have a way," she corrected, leaning into him. "Together." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ethan led Florence away from the celebration toward a waiting carriage decorated with flowers and ribbons. "Where are we going?" she asked, though she had a good idea. "The house isn't finished yet." Ethan smiled mysteriously. "Not completely, no, but certain essential parts are. And Mr. Taylor has kindly offered us his hunting cabin by the lake for our honeymoon. I thought we might stop by our house on the way, though, so you can see the progress." They bid farewell to their guests amid cheers and well wishes, then set off into the gathering dusk. Florence leaned against Ethan's shoulder as he drove, feeling a profound contentment settle over her. When they reached the site of their future home, Florence was amazed at how much progress had been made since she had last seen it. The frame was now enclosed with walls, a roof covered the structure, and windows more than she had expected punctuated the exterior. "Ethan, it's wonderful," she exclaimed as he helped her down from the carriage. "When did you find time to do all this?" "I had help," he admitted. "Once word got out that I was building our home, offers came in from all over. Mr. Taylor's ranch hands, the Pearson boys, even Mayor Holloway's son pitched in. Seems you've made more friends than enemies in Wood River after all. He led her to the front door, an actual door now, not just an opening in the frame, and paused, a playful smile on his lips. I believe there's a tradition to be observed here. Before Florence could respond, he had swept her into his arms, her skirts billowing as he carried her across the threshold into their home. Inside, he set her gently on her feet but kept his arms around her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton," he murmured, bending to kiss her softly. Florence returned his kiss, then looked around in wonder at what would soon be their living room. Though still unfinished, she could see Ethan's careful planning in the placement of windows to catch the morning light, the generous size of the fireplace that would warm them through Nebraska winters, the built-in shelves that would house her beloved books. "It's perfect," she whispered, tears of happiness pricking at her eyes. "Absolutely perfect." Ethan led her from room to room, pointing out features he had included with her in mind: a spacious kitchen with ample counter space for the baking she enjoyed, a small study where she could write or prepare her lessons, and upstairs, 3 bedrooms a master for them and 2 smaller ones for the children they both hoped would come. Standing in what would be their bedroom, looking out the window at the first stars appearing over the river, Florence felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost overwhelmed her. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she admitted softly. "For so long I thought I had to choose my principles or acceptance, my voice or love. I never dreamed I could have both." Ethan came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder as they both gazed out at the night. "You deserve both and more, Florence. You never have to choose between being who you are and being loved. Not with me." She turned in his arms, looking up into the face of the man who had changed everything by simply accepting her as she was. "I love you, Ethan Thornton. And I promise to spend the rest of my days making sure you never regret choosing the most difficult woman in Nebraska." Ethan laughed, the sound warm and rich in the quiet of their future home. "The only regret I could ever have would be not finding you sooner." His expression grew tender as he cupped her cheek in his hand. "My courageous, outspoken, brilliant wife." As their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, Florence knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world not despite her voice, but because of it. And with Ethan beside her, that voice would only grow stronger, reaching farther, changing more lives than she had ever dared to dream possible. Outside their window, the stars continued their eternal dance over the Nebraska plains, witnesses to the beginning of a love story that had started with rejection, but had bloomed into acceptance, celebration, and a partnership that would echo through generations to come. 5 years later, Florence stood on the porch of their home, watching as her husband taught their 4-year-old son, James, how to gently brush his pony. The spring air was sweet with the scent of wildflowers, and from inside the house came the sound of their 2-year-old daughter, Elena, chattering happily with Mrs. Peterson, who had become an unlikely but devoted friend and occasional babysitter. So much had changed in 5 years. The house had been completed and expanded as their family grew. The bookshop still thrived, now managed with the help of Eliza Taylor, who at 17 showed a keen business sense and a love of literature equal to Florence's own. And the Wood River School now offered girls the same educational opportunities as boys, thanks to a curriculum Florence had helped design, and which had become a model for other schools in the territory. Perhaps the most significant change, however, had come 6 months earlier, when the citizens of Wood River had elected Florence to the town council, the first woman to hold such a position in the county's history. The same voices that had once called for her silence now sought her opinion on matters ranging from education to town development to the management of resources during the previous winter's harsh blizzards. "Mama, look," James called, his small face alight with pride as he carefully ran the brush along his pony's flank. "I'm doing it right." "You certainly are, sweetheart," Florence called back, smiling at her son's enthusiasm. He had Ethan's warm brown eyes and her own determined chin, a combination that promised both strength and sensitivity as he grew. Ethan looked up, catching her gaze across the yard. Even after 5 years of marriage, that simple exchange of glances could still send a pleasant warmth through Florence's body. He said something quietly to James, then crossed the yard to join her on the porch. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Thornton," he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. Florence leaned into him, enjoying the solid strength of him. "I was just thinking about how much has changed, how different my life is from what I imagined it would be." "Better or worse?" Ethan asked, though the twinkle in his eyes suggested he knew the answer. "Immeasurably better," she assured him, turning to face him fully. "Though I wouldn't have believed it possible if someone had predicted it 6 years ago." Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch as tender as it had been on their wedding day. "I knew from the moment I saw you standing up to the mayor at that Founders' Day celebration that you were someone special, someone who could change Wood River and me for the better." Florence smiled at the memory. "And I thought you were just another cowboy passing through. How wrong I was." "Not entirely," Ethan teased. "I was indeed a cowboy, just one with a weakness for outspoken bookshop owners and the philosophy of Henry David Thoreau." Their conversation was interrupted by Alina toddling onto the porch, her dark curls bouncing with each step, her blue eyes so like Florence's wide with excitement. "Papa, story time." Ethan scooped up his daughter with practiced ease, settling her on his hip. "Is it that time already, princess?" "What'll it be today?" "The Three Bears, Jack and the Beanstalk." Alina shook her head emphatically. "Hatship suit." Florence and Ethan exchanged amused glances. Their daughter's favorite story was about Hatshepsut, the woman pharaoh of Egypt, a tale Florence had first shared during her reading circles and had adapted for younger ears. "Hatshepsut it is," Ethan agreed, carrying Alina inside. "Let's call your brother in too. I think he's about done with his pony lesson." As Florence watched her husband gather their children for story time, a ritual he had established from their earliest days, she felt a profound sense of rightness, of having found exactly where she belonged. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Florence and Ethan sat together on their porch swing, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance over the meadow. Ethan had his arm around her shoulders, and she rested comfortably against him, their bodies fitting together with the ease of long familiarity. "I had a letter from Mrs. Abernathy's granddaughter today," Florence mentioned, breaking a comfortable silence. "Rebecca's graduated from the university and been accepted to medical school in Philadelphia." Ethan whistled softly. "A female doctor, that'll ruffle some feathers." "Mrs. Abernathy is beside herself with pride," Florence said with a smile. "She's telling anyone who'll listen about her granddaughter, the future physician. Can you imagine what she would have said to that idea 6 years ago?" "People change," Ethan observed, his fingers idly stroking Florence's shoulder. "When shown a different way is possible, most folks can eventually adjust their thinking. It just takes someone brave enough to show them." Florence thought about that for a moment. "It takes more than one brave voice, though. It takes others willing to listen, to consider, to support." She tilted her head to look up at him. "It takes people like you, Ethan. He smiled down at her, the corners of his eyes crinkling in the way she loved. "We make a good team, Mrs. Thornton." "The best," she agreed, reaching up to touch his face, still marveling sometimes that this man was hers, that they had built this life together. "Thank you for seeing value in my voice when others only heard noise." "Your voice is what this world needs," Ethan replied, echoing the words he had spoken to her during their first dinner together. "I knew it then, and I know it even more certainly now." As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, Florence Thornton felt the deep contentment of a life being lived authentically, surrounded by love that didn't require her to be less than her full self. From her children, who were being raised to value both strength and tenderness, regardless of gender, to her community that had gradually learned to respect rather than fear her outspokenness, to her husband who had loved her not despite, but because of her bold spirit, she had found a harmony she had never thought possible. And as Ethan bent to kiss her in the gathering darkness, Florence knew with absolute certainty that her voice, their voices, joined together, would continue to echo through Wood River and beyond, changing minds, opening hearts, and creating a world where being outspoken and bold was not a flaw to be corrected, but a gift to be celebrated.